All right. So let's get into today's topic. This one is called the Upstream Effect, and it's one of my favorites. It's for me, it's honestly like one of the most compelling reasons as to why the breath is so important. So this is really like a framework that I use all the time, and it's like keeps on coming up. And so I felt really compelled to share that with you today. So it starts to give us some ideas about how the breath will kind of tie in with like our identity and our actions. And so that kind of seems like a little bit of a stretch, but once we start to see the framework, it starts to make more sense. Another thing that I think this framework does really well is that it starts to demystify other things like how we think about um, psychologist work and things like manifestation, and really just helps us to get to the root of what we're here for, which is like health and striving for goals and tying in all that with our values. Yeah. So what we're gonna do is hop on the whiteboard for this one. And what I'll share first is really just the outline of it, okay? So as it goes, bum. So at the top of this stream, we have the breath, okay? And what's actually right next to the breath is posture. So posture and the breath are inextricably tied. So when the posture changes, the breath changes, and oftentimes vice versa, okay? And then just downstream of that is nervous system. So I'll abbreviate that one. And then downstream from the nervous system are our emotions. And then downstream from the emotions are our thoughts. Ooh, okay. And then downstream from our thoughts are our actions. So it's actions and behaviors. Okay, zoom out a bit. And then below our actions is identity, who we are. All right. And then the last one are outcomes. All right. So yeah, that's the whole order of things here. And so the important thing to know is that like you can move upstream, kind of like so say you started with actions and then you're trying to change your thoughts, emotions, nervous system, but there's just way more influence going downstream than there is upstream, right? And what's important to note is that the ones that we can actually influence, right, that we have conscious control over, like we can change our breath and we can change our posture, we can change our thoughts, right? I can think of a purple elephant and then I'm thinking about it. I can read a book and then I'm thinking about those words. We can change our actions. And then that's pretty much it, right? So that's where our conscious control lies. And so if we want to improve some of these other aspects, like some people do want to improve their emotional state, right? We could argue that that's actually why we do a lot of the things that we do, right? Is just to feel a certain way. Now, I could try to think my way into good emotions, but I could also breathe my way into more appropriate emotions. Um, so what I like to look at is like, yeah, some examples. So if we think about trying to make some real changes in our life through like a psychologist approach, right? So they're kind of like they're very much in the thoughts level. And so if we use those tools, like we can maybe change our actions, identity, and then in turn our outcomes. But if the emotions aren't in line with the thoughts that we're having, it's going to make it very difficult. Now, again, you can create some upward influence, but it's just a lot tougher, right? So, what I'm really arguing here, or like what has become more and more apparent, is that if we make sure that the breath and the position that we put our body in is in line with the thoughts that we want, the identity that we want, and the outcomes that we want, it's just going to be a lot easier. Now, outcomes can be a whole number of things, right? So it can be the the car that we want to have, the six-pack abs, the good blood pressure, you fill in the blank, lots of money, right? And so that's going to come as a byproduct of who you are, so who you identify as. Um, so, for example, I think about like, hey, like I identify as a really chill guy, but if my breath is locked and I'm holding my breath, I'm like hyperventilating and my breath is not being chill, like it's going to be very difficult for me to identify as that. Like I'll be lying to myself. Another really good example of this, I think, that really helped me to, yeah, kind of break down or demystify things was manifestation. So in the manifestation space, um, I don't know if this is still kind of the general culture, what people are doing. A lot of people are coming in at the identity level. And so, you would say like, I am wealthy, or I'm a great father, I'm a great mother, I am a successful entrepreneur. And so they were just like hammering the identity part. And again, you can do that, and if you like hit it hard, like okay, then your actions will start to change. But maybe those actions were like, I identify as a successful entrepreneur, but your action was making a vision board, you know? And then they kind of would just like fall short there. So if it doesn't reach the thoughts level, it's like it doesn't have a chance to reach the emotions level, the emotions that correspond naturally with someone who is the successful entrepreneur or whatever it might be. So if we make sure that we don't miss the breath, right? So a successful entrepreneur is going to be someone who is breathing calm and relaxed in these situations where they're highly skilled, right? They're like they kind of own it. So when the breath is locked in those situations, the nervous system is going to follow suit. The emotions are going to feel less savory for that context. And then it's going to be very difficult to then identify it as that. Because if it doesn't feel good, right, you're like, I'm trying to become this thing, but that thing you're trying to become doesn't feel very good in the body because the breath is stuck, the emotions aren't in line, the nervous system is out of sorts. It's going to be less likely that your body will continue to pursue that very naturally. Yeah. So, yeah, when we get this in line, the identity, this like manifestation stuff, and manifestation really kind of ties in with like outcomes, of course. Um, but yeah, just making sure that we get all the steps in order. So, another one that I really like to look at is we'd often simplify things. So be do, and have, right? So that'd be another way to talk about each of these. And the kind of like the original phrasing of this was be, do, and have. Be, do, and have as the kind of order of like how we'd approach things. So be, do, and have was basically the upstream effect, like the old version, okay? And just notice how, like we talked about with like manifestation, you're like, I am this, and when you talk to yourself in the mirror, or you're trying to convince yourself of this identity. And then, yes, maybe eventually that would affect and change our actions. And then, of course, we'd have the outcomes. But if we flip that, right? So even just with this, like if we change it to do, be, and have, say you're someone who's trying to get really fit, and so you would want to identify as like someone who goes to the gym or trains, right? They train for their sport or whatever it is. Now, let's just say like you started training 4 days per week. And if you do that consistently, right, like you've been doing that for 5 months, yeah, and I've done it consistently, notice how much easier that is to identify as someone who exercises, someone who trains, someone who's an athlete, right? That identity is going to come so much easier because you have evidence. You get it, right? So you have this evidence to support the person who you are trying to become, the person who you are in that moment. If we just start from the identity and try to work our way up, like it's going to be very difficult for you to lie to yourself. Like you're not going to believe it, right? Right? I'm a multimillionaire, right? Um, if I say something like that, like even in my body, like maybe my nervous system, my emotions, my thoughts, like my next thought was like, no, you're not, right? And so that's going to be like very difficult to work upstream. So yes, we want to like create the actions, the identity will follow, and then in our three-dimensional reality, like the outcomes will come once we have all these things lined up, right? So it's just a delayed effect of who you are, right? And then again, just making sure that like all of that corresponds with these things. It might be a little bit of a stretch of the imagination to know exactly what the breath and posture is with like certain identities, but let's consider like confidence, right? So like what's a confident posture, right? Well, it's like, well, my head stacked over my shoulders, my shoulder blades are back. I'm tall. I my eye line is like on the horizon. I'm not always looking down, and I'm breathing very casually, right? It's not stuck. It's like this ownership, right? So confident breath is like very relaxed. Yeah. Someone who has a lot of skill in a certain aspect of their life. So, like another one would be like confidence in public speaking. So, for most people in public speaking, when they get on stage, like what happens, right? The nervous system is doing its thing. We're sweating on our face, palms, our armpits. We start to get like tunnel vision. The breath changes, right? And so, someone who's been speaking publicly for a long time, the breath will start to even out, right? It just gets a lot more normal. It's still going to be a little bit more like arousing, right? So, probably the breath is going to pick up faster than sitting on the sofa. You still need a little bit more energy in that situation to do the thing, to do the public speaking. But the posture is going to be confident, right? Again, we know what that's going to look like. We've all seen competent and confident public speakers. And the breath is just going to be so easy for them. And so the emotions that they're feeling is like are ones of confidence. Yeah. It's like what does it feel like to be confident? They're having confident thoughts, right? So less of the oh, I'm gonna blow it. Like I'm gonna forget this slide, right? The thoughts are just gonna be different. They know what they're gonna say. They're gonna feel, like they're thinking about the crowd and that interaction. And then of course the actions are, public speaking is a really good one because like you still have to maybe move about the stage, like you have to use your hands to speak. You have to do the action of saying the thing, right? And the identity would then, if the speaker has all of those things in line, then it'd be very easy for them to believe that they're a confident public speaker. And then what's the outcome that they want to have? Well, that depends on the speaker. Maybe they want to have a big impact with the crowd in that moment. Um, Maybe they want to sell a lot of books, things of that nature. So all that to say is like I really recommend to like keep this one, like write it down. Um, I'll share a photo that you can save as well. And just like reference this one. So when you're thinking about like, what do I want? What are my values? What are my goals? It's like a lot of that stuff is outcome driven. Some of the values are identity driven. And just making sure that like, hey, I'm not missing these other levels. Now, especially the ones that we've highlighted here, right? Like the ones that we actually have influence over. By the way, like our thoughts is just the narrative, right? So mind and body, state and story. And so my definition for, I won't write it all out, but for mindset, it's not really my definition, but this is the one I like to use, is just the story that we tell ourselves, the story that we tell ourselves. And stories are made of words, and words we can change, right? So we can write it out. This is where like moving a little bit slower oftentimes can be very useful, right? So we give ourselves a moment to analyze those. And then also with the words that pop up, we can take note of what's happening at the breath level. So every time I say email, right, which is a good example. So email is something that when people are writing emails, like they open up their inbox and they hold their breath. It's become so common that they call it email apnea. Like there's a evidence-based word for it, right? So it's in the literature, in the research. And so they start to hold their breath. Um, and so in order to change our relationship with that, you would want to not hold your breath. Right? So you can start to change your relationship with that. And of course, like this goes into things beyond like simple things like that. It could be intrusive thoughts. It could be a lot of these ones that keep popping up. And usually the ones that keep recurring, we will kind of say very fast in our self-talk. And so, yes, ideally, we want to slow that down either in our heads, slow it down, pencil and paper can be a really great strategy. And then again, come back up to the top. What's happening at the breath level? And then once the breath level once the breath corresponds with that, the nervous system will follow suit. So will the emotions, and then the thoughts will kind of naturally be more fitting for the context that we're in. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. I hope that helps. Yeah, I highly encourage you to continue to use this structure, this framework, and see how a lot of aspects of your own life tie right into this format. All right. See ya.